All right, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, always exciting to dig into these,
Absolutely.
especially when it's driven by, what you guys want to know more about.
Exactly, you asked. And today we're diving into Celecoxib, better known as Celebrex.
Mm.
We're going to cover a lot of ground, starting with kind of its origins, how it's used, how it's made, that whole regulatory pathway, the ins and outs.
Yeah, all this stuff you don't really think about when you just see it on the shelf, right?
Exactly. And then, of course, we'll look at like the bigger picture, how it all fits in and what kind of impact it's had.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we don't have like a whole file specifically on Celebrex itself,
Right.
but we've got a ton of info on other pain relievers and anti-inflammatories.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like aspirin, ibuprofen, naproxen.
Exactly, diclofenac, acetaminophen, all those big names.
Yeah, yeah.
So by looking at those, we can kind of draw some parallels, right? Get a better understanding of how Celebrex kind of came to be and where it fits in.
I think that's a great approach because, I mean, when you look at the history of these medications, celecoxib is what's known as a COX inhibitor,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And to understand that, you really got to go back and look at those older NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs.
Yeah, makes sense.
We're talking aspirin, ibuprofen, naproxen, and the classics.
Right, right.
But there's a big thing with those, and it pops up in a lot of our sources, like the stuff on diclofenac, acetaminophen, all of them. They can cause some problems in your gut.
Yeah, the GI issues.
Exactly, the GI risks, and that's not something to take lightly.
No, definitely not. Especially, I mean, you've got things like Ray's syndrome linked to aspirin, right?
Oh yeah, that's scary, especially for kids.
And that's mentioned in the acetaminophen and aspirin reports, right?
So it's like a well-known thing, and then you've got diclofenac being like one of the stronger NSAIDs out there.
Yeah, it's up there in terms of potency, according to the diclofenac source, anyway.
So it's clear that there was a need for something that could tackle the pain and inflammation,
Right.
but do it without messing with your stomach so much.
Yeah, like a better safety profile.
Exactly, and that's kind of where these selective COX-2 inhibitors enter the picture.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, actually.
So how does that work?
So basically, you've got these two enzymes in the body, COX1 and COX2.
Okay.
And this comes up in the ibuprofen, the diclofenac, and the naproxen sources.
Gotcha.
So COX1, that's kind of like the good guy, protects your stomach lining, helps with blood clotting.
Okay.
And COX2, well, that one's more involved in inflammation and the pain signals.
Interesting.
So the idea was if you could develop a drug that zeroed in on COX2,
Uh-huh.
you could get the pain relief, fight the inflammation, but without hitting COX1 so hard.
So less stomach upset.
Right, exactly. At least that was the theory.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's kind of where celecoxib slots in, right?
Yeah, so our stuff doesn't say exactly when it was invented, the eureka moment, but it's clearly part of this bigger trend in NSAID research, trying to find that sweet spot between effectiveness and making sure it's safe for people.
It's like a constant evolution, right?
Yeah, totally.
And we see that even with, like ibuprofen. The source mentions that it was developed as a better alternative to aspirin, specifically for being easier on the stomach.
Yeah, and the naproxen info, it mentions that the company that developed it, Syntex, they were actually focused on steroids first.
Huh, that's interesting.
And then they moved into NSA.
So it's like this whole progression of trying to find the best way to manage pain and inflammation.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see how celecoxib kind of builds on all that. It's like the next step in this whole journey.
It's fascinating how each drug kind of informs the next one.
Yeah, it's a continuous learning process, right? Building on what's come before and trying to improve it.
So with celecoxib being this COX-2 selective inhibitor, how is it actually used in medicine? Like, what's it prescribed for?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, our sources don't give us a specific list of approved uses for celecoxib.
Okay.
But we can kind of make some educated guesses based on, what other NSAIDs are used for.
Right, because it falls under that umbrella.
Exactly. So for instance, diclofenac, right, that's used for all sorts of things like osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis,
Okay.
gout, tendinitis, bursitis, pain after surgery, headaches, even menstrual cramps.
Wow, that's a lot of different conditions.
Yeah, it's got a pretty wide range of applications, and naproxen is similar.
Okay.
It's used for ankylosing spondylitis, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, a lot of the same things as diclofenac.
Gotcha. And what about ibuprofen?
Ibuprofen is more for like general pain and fever, but it's also approved for rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis.
So basically, we can assume that celecoxib would probably be used for similar types of conditions, right?
Yeah, pretty much anything where pain and inflammation are the main problems.
And the idea is that with its KOX2 selectivity, it'll be, gentler on the stomach compared to some of those older NSAIDs.
Exactly. That's the big selling point, right? Less of those nasty GI side effects.
Which are no joke. I mean, both the ibuprofen and diclofenac reports really emphasize that.
Yeah. And the diclofenac one even says the GI risk is significant, like it's a real concern.
So that's something to keep in mind. And it's interesting because the ibuprofen source points out that while ibuprofen itself is comparable in how well it works to other NSAIDs, they can have different safety profiles.
Right, especially when it comes to those GI and cardiovascular risks.
Exactly. And the naproxen report shows that it also has its own set of GI risks.
Yeah, so it seems like each NSAID kind of has its own quirks in terms of safety.
So even though we don't have a specific list for celecoxib,
Right.
we can kind of put it in this context, right, of managing pain and inflammation.
Yeah, for sure.
But with that added focus on trying to minimize the stomach issues.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance, right? Effectiveness and safety.
Okay, so let's move on to how celecoxib is actually made, like the manufacturing process.
Right, into the factory.
Yeah, about that, our sources don't actually give us any specifics on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of a black box in this case.
Huh. So we don't know the secret recipe.
Not exactly, but we do have a lot of info on how other drugs are made, like acetaminophen, aspirin, ibuprofen, and naproxen.
Okay.
So maybe looking at those can give us some clues, right? Some general ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be somewhat similar, right? It's all chemistry at the end of the day.
Right. So for example, acetaminophen, there are actually a couple of ways to make it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's an older method that uses nitrophenol, and then there's this more modern Celanese process that uses hydroxyacetophenone.
Okay, that's pretty cool how, they find new and better ways to do things.
Exactly. And then you have aspirin, which is actually a pretty straightforward process. It's just esterifying salicylic acid.
Okay.
And then with ibuprofen, there's the original boost process. And then there's this more efficient modern BHC process. And then you've got naproxen, which involves all these complex asymmetric synthesis methods.
Wow, sounds complicated.
Yeah, but it's necessary to get the drug in its most effective form.
So even though the processes are different, there's definitely a common thread. Like they all involve, these precise chemical reactions, very careful purification steps.
Absolutely. And one thing that's highlighted in all our sources for diclofenac, ibuprofen, naproxen, they all talk about the importance of quality control.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be huge, making sure everything is up to standard.
Exactly. They all mention adhering to these pharmacopoeial standards like the USP, the United States Pharmacopoeia, and the European Pharmacopoeia.
So those set the bar for like purity and strength and all that.
Exactly. So while we don't know exactly what goes into making celecoxib, we can be pretty sure that it involves some pretty intricate chemistry.
Yeah.
And a ton of testing at every stage.
Right, to make sure it's safe and effective.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the regulatory pathway for celecoxib.
Okay, so how it gets approved.
All the hoops you got to jump through.
Right, all the paperwork.
Yeah. So again, our sources don't give us the specifics for celecoxib.
Really? So we don't know how it navigated the FDA or anything?
No, not exactly, but we do have some insights into the general process, like how things work in the U.S. and Europe.
Okay.
From those reports on acetaminophen, diclofenac, ibuprofen, naproxen.
Right. So we can kind of extrapolate from that.
Exactly. And one thing that's really emphasized is the importance of clinical trials.
Oh, yeah. Can make sure it actually works and doesn't cause any crazy side effects.
Exactly. And this is mentioned in the acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and naproxen sources.
So it's like a universal requirement. You got to prove it's safe and effective.
Absolutely. And another interesting thing is the difference between over-the-counter drugs and prescription drugs.
Oh, right. Like how some things you can just buy off the shelf and others you need a doctor's note.
Exactly. And both the acetaminophen and ibuprofen reports touch on how that whole process works.
Mm.
And then there's this increasing focus on safety warnings and potential risks, especially with NSAIDs.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with all this stuff about cardiovascular and GI issues.
Yeah, and the diclofenac, ibuprofen, and naproxen reports all mention that.
So it's like they're under a microscope, that
Yeah.
got to make sure they're not causing more harm than good.
So even though we don't know exactly how Celecoxib went through the process, we know it would have been rigorous.
Right, they wouldn't just like wave it through.
No, there would have been a ton of testing, a ton of scrutiny, especially with all the concerns surrounding NSAIDs.
Makes you appreciate all the work that goes into getting a drug approved.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, there's the whole question of controversies and legal issues.
Oh, right, like lawsuits and all that.
Yeah, now our sources don't mention any specific controversies with Celecoxib itself,
Okay.
but they do cover a lot of the issues that have come up with other pain relievers and NSAIDs.
So like what kind of stuff?
Well, for example, there's the whole thing with aspirin and Ray's syndrome.
Oh, right, that was a big deal, right?
Yeah, and that's discussed in the aspirin and acetaminophen sources.
And that led to some big changes, right? Like how aspirin is labeled and who it's given to.
Exactly. Especially for kids, there were a lot of concerns.
Makes sense. You don't want to be giving something to kids if it could cause, serious problems.
And then, of course, there are the ongoing concerns about cardiovascular risks with some NSAIDs.
Oh yeah, that's a big one these days.
And the diclofenac source is really informative on this.
Okay, what does it say?
Well, it mentions that studies have shown an increased risk of major adverse cardiovascular events.
Wow, that's serious stuff.
Yeah, and they say that this risk is comparable to that of coxibs.
And coxibs, that's the class of drugs that includes celecoxib, right?
Exactly. So it's definitely relevant.
Yeah, that raises some red flags for sure.
And the ibuprofen and naproxen reports also mention these cardiovascular concerns,
Okay.
especially with higher doses of ibuprofen.
So it's not just a coxib thing.
Right, and this has actually led to stronger warnings from the FDA and the EMA.
Wow, so they're really taking it seriously.
Yeah, and they even mentioned this trial called the Precision Trial,
Okay.
which directly compared Celecoxib, ibuprofen, and naproxen in terms of cardiovascular safety.
Interesting. And what were the results?
Well, that's where it gets a bit tricky. The interpretation of the findings is still being debated.
So no clear answers there.
Not yet, but it shows you that this is an active area of research.
Yeah, they're still trying to figure it all out.
And then you have things like liver toxicity, which is a big concern with acetaminophen.
Right. The acetaminophen report goes into that in detail.
Yeah, and diclofenac can also cause liver problems, although it's pretty rare.
So even though we don't have any like specific scandals or anything for celecoxib, we can see from these other drugs that there are definitely potential risks to be aware of.
Yeah, it's like a cautionary tale, got to be careful with these medications.
And the ibuprofen source actually brings up this big legal case, the Vioxx litigation.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Wasn't that a coxib as well?
It was, yeah, and it really highlights how these safety concerns can lead to huge legal battles.
And I bet that had a big impact on how they communicate the risks of NSAIDs now.
Oh, absolutely. So it's not a stretch to imagine that celecoxib would have been under similar scrutiny.
Yeah, especially since it's both an NSAI
Right.
and a CABOS2 inhibitor. All right, so the potential for controversy and legal issues is definitely there.
Makes sense, They got to make sure it's as safe as possible.
Okay, so let's dive into the economic side of things, the market impact of Celecoxib.
Okay, so like sales and all that.
Yeah, how much money it makes, how it affects the market, all that good
And
stuff.
like the business side of things.
Exactly, but our sources don't actually give us specific economic data for Celecoxib.
Oh, okay. So we're flying blind on the numbers.
Kind of, but we do have a lot of information on the pharmaceutical market in general.
Okay, so we can maybe make some educated guesses.
Yeah, for example, the acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and naproxen reports all talk about the competition between brand name drugs.
Right, like Tylenol versus the generic stuff.
Exactly, and how that competition usually leads to lower prices once the patent on the original drug expires.
Yeah, because then everyone can make their own version.
Right, and then the diclofenac and naproxen sources actually give us some numbers on the global market size for pain relievers and NSAIDs.
Oh, interesting. So, like, how big are we talking?
Well, the diclofenac market is estimated to be billions of dollars annually.
Wow, that's a lot of pills.
Yeah, it's a huge market, and the reports on acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and naproxen also show that making a drug available over the counter can really boost its sales.
Oh, yeah, because then anyone can buy it. You don't need a prescription.
Exactly, and it's interesting because the acetaminophen report mentions how limiting pack sizes in the UK actually led to a decrease in liver transplants due to overdose.
Really? So it actually had a positive impact.
Yeah, and probably saved the healthcare system some money too.
Hmm. So regulation can have a real economic impact.
Absolutely. And then the ibuprofen source talks about the Vioxx litigation
Right. The lawsuit we talked about earlier.
and how that really shows how legal issues can shake things up in the market.
Yeah, it can make or break a drug.
So even though we don't have hard numbers for Celecoxib, we can kind of assume that it follows similar trends, right?
Yeah, especially since it was a brand name prescription drug.
Exactly. So it probably faced generic competition once the patent ran out.
Right. Which would have driven the price down.
And being a prescription drug, its market reach would have been limited by how many doctors were prescribing it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's not like you can just pick it up at the grocery store.
So it's a different ball game than those over-the-counter drugs.
Definitely. And I'm sure all those economic factors like competition and regulation played a role in Celecoxib's story.
Yeah, for sure. It's all connected.
All right, so for our final stop on this deep dive, let's talk about the cultural and societal impact of Celecoxib.
Okay, so like how it's influenced how we think about pain or how we deal with it.
Exactly. Like, has it changed the way we live our lives?
And honestly, our sources don't really give us specifics on that for Celecoxib.
Oh, okay. So we don't know if it's like sparked any cultural movements or anything.
Not exactly, but we do see how other pain relievers have made their mark on society.
Okay, like what?
Well, the acetaminophen report talks about how Tylenol and Panadol became like household names.
Oh, yeah, everyone knows those.
And how they were seen as the safer options after all the Ray's syndrome worries with aspirin.
Right, so that really shaped people's perceptions.
Absolutely, and the aspirin source actually talks about how aspirin was like a cultural icon.
Really?
Yeah, it was mass marketed early on. It was even used by NASA.
Wow, so it's been around the block.
And the acetaminophen report also mentions the Tylenol crisis.
Oh yeah, that was scary. People tampering with the bottles.
And that actually led to a huge change, the development of tamper-evident packaging.
Wow, so it had a lasting impact on how we package things.
Yeah, and both the acetaminophen and aspirin sources talk about the role of public health warnings and media coverage in shaping how people view drugs.
Makes sense. People pay attention to that kind of stuff.
So even though we don't have specific examples for Celecoxib, it's safe to assume that it's had some influence, right?
Yeah, especially since it's a widely prescribed pain reliever.
Exactly. It's probably shaped conversations between doctors and patients.
Right, and been part of the whole discussion about, the pros and cons of using drugs to manage pain.
So it's part of that bigger picture, even if we don't have all the details.
Yeah, it fits into that whole cultural understanding of pain and how we deal with it.
So to wrap up our deep dive here, even though we didn't have a ton of information specifically on Celecoxib,
Right.
we were able to kind of piece together a pretty good picture
Mm.
by looking at all those other drugs, aspirin, ibuprofen, naproxen, diclofenac, all that.
It was like a puzzle, putting all the pieces together.
Exactly. And we've seen how it likely fits into the history of KEOX2 inhibitors.
Right, that whole lineage.
And what is probably used for the whole manufacturing and regulatory process, the potential risks, the economic factors, even the cultural impact.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can learn about one drug by looking at all the others around it.
And I think that's a key takeaway for you guys listening. You know,
Right.
even when you don't have all the specifics, understanding the bigger context can be really valuable.
Absolutely. It helps you see the whole picture.
And it really makes you think about all the work that goes into every single medication.
Yeah, all the research, the testing, the regulations, it's a long road.
And then there's that question of balancing effectiveness with safety.
Right. Got to make sure it actually helps people without causing any undue harm.
And that's an ongoing challenge, right?
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act.
So there you have it, our deep dive into the world of Celecoxib.
Yeah. Hopefully you guys found it informative.
And if you have any other medications you're curious about, just let us know.
Yeah. We're always up for a challenge.
Every drug has its own story, and we're happy to help you uncover them.
So keep those questions coming.
Thanks for joining us
And we'll see you next time
for another deep dive
into the world of pharmaceuticals.
All right. Take care, everyone.